Welcome to the deep dive. You sent us one of the most poignant, uh, just fascinating stacks of source material we've seen in a long time. A genuine time capsule of Seattle's history, its culture, and the crushing weight of its past.
It's a really remarkable story. It's centered on the lingering scars of World War II, specifically the Japanese-American internment, but it's viewed through this uniquely challenging, almost impossible position of a Chinese-American man.
Right, who found himself caught right in the middle of it all.
Exactly, and it just offers layer upon layer of complexity, about identity, about loyalties you're forced to have, devastating love, and just the cost of survival during wartime.
Our mission today is to follow two parallel timelines, and they're separated by more than 40 years. The first one is 1986, and that's where we find a recently widowed man who is wrestling with this profound regret and a literal physical discovery that forces him to confront his ghost.
And the second timeline is 1942. That's where he navigated a suddenly brutal world, fell in love across these rigid cultural and nationalistic lines, and witnessed an immense injustice that, well, it basically dictated the course of his next 4 decades.
Yeah. And we aren't just summarizing a story here. We're trying to extract the surprising historical connections, the deep emotional insights that are hidden in this specific slice of American experience.
We want to understand how the political hatreds of the 1940s could shatter one man's future, only to have the artifacts of that shattered world reappear 40 years later and, demand a reconciliation.
So let's set the scene. It's 1986. We meet Henry. He's recently retired, recently widowed.
He has all the time in the world now, but the sources paint this really painful picture. It says he has no one to share the hours with.
And no one to walk down to the Monhey Bakery for something as simple as you at being those carrot mooncakes on a cool autumn evening. And that tiny detail, it tells you everything about the scale of his loss.
It really does, because the mooncake, the yuet bing, it's not just a pastry. It's a symbol of a shared Chinese tradition, a connection.
A connection that his late wife, Ethel, must have embodied.
Exactly. And now that connection is gone. So instead of his old routine, he finds himself drawn back to a very specific location in Seattle's International District, the Panama Hotel. He had heard a rumor, in the local marketplace.
The hotel itself is almost a character in this history, isn't it? It's described as being caught between worlds, looking like an Art Deco halfway house.
And that description perfectly mirrors Henry's own state. He's a man between lifetimes, unmoored, haunted by a past he had successfully avoided for decades.
He chose to look forward, but the past decided to look back at him.
And it looks back with a vengeance.
So Henry's curiosity about this rumor, it's immediately justified. He arrives to find this frantic scene. A crowd gathered, cameras flashing, a news crew setting up outside the Panama Hotel's red brick entrance.
And the new owner, a woman named Palmyra Pettison, she's walking up the steps, holding something wrapped in cloth that clearly has some weight to it.
And this is where the physical world just suddenly delivers a punch to Henry's carefully maintained emotional isolation.
It really does. Palmyra announces that during renovations, they found something profound in the basement. The hidden belongings of 37 Japanese families.
37. Wow.
And she calls it instantly and so accurately a time capsule from the war years.
But that phrase time capsule, it doesn't quite capture the tragedy of it, does it?
No, not at all. These aren't just relics. They are artifacts of a forced erasure. And you have to linger on the specific items she reveals because they show the sheer immediacy of that internment order.
Okay, so what did they find? What was the first thing?
The first item is a Japanese parasol made from delicate bamboo, bright red and white, painted with these cheerful orange koi fish.
So it's vibrant, beautiful.
Utterly. And completely foreign to the American war aesthetic at the time. Then there's a massive steamer trunk with the name Shimizu on it, and it's plastered with old travel stickers. Admiral Oriental Lines, linking Seattle to Yokohama and Tokyo.
So well-traveled family.
You'd think so. And then they open the trunk, and what's inside speaks directly to the hope that was just instantly crushed by the war.
What was in it?
Things that were packed quickly but so carefully. The source material says they were saved for a happier time that never came.
That's devastating.
It is. A pristine white communion dress, tarnished silver candlesticks, an old electric rice cooker, a picnic basket.
Things you wouldn't throw away. They were essentials of life, of identity, future plans, all just preserved and abandoned.
Yeah. It's the sheer banality of the loss that makes it so powerful. An electric rice cooker, something so practical, sitting right next to a communion dress, a symbol of spiritual significance.
They were expecting to come back, to pick up a life
Yeah.
that just didn't materialize for them.
And this realization, this physical manifestation of lost time, it instantly triggers something in Henry. He feels this profound, almost paralyzing sense of connection, of guilt and urgency.
You have to get in there.
He has to. He's immediately compelled to gain access to the basement, but he can't go in as Henry. He has to pretend he's looking for his family's lost belongings.
So he lies.
He does. He signs the list of people looking for their relatives' belongings, but he uses the name Okabe.
Okabe. That's a Japanese name.
Exactly. It's an act of profound dishonesty, but it's driven by decades of this hidden grief. He justifies it to himself, thinking, I'll be a blue-blooded, half-Martian Canadian immigrant if that's what it takes. He just desperately needed to get in to find some evidence of Keiko.
And does it work? Does Palmyra let him in?
She does. She grants him limited access, and the description of the basement is it's visceral. It is a physical manifestation of lost time and forgotten people.
What was it like?
Dusty, dark, packed shoulder-wide with this forest of crates and trunks and suitcases piled high to the ceiling. 40-plus years of silent storage. It created what's described as a chest-pressing wave of claustrophobia.
And you have to imagine the smell.
Yeah.
Old leather, musty paper, decades of dust.
Absolutely. And Henry's search is guided by this one singular focus: finding items that belong to the Okabe family.
But what he finds instead are these random remnants of Nisei life, second-generation Japanese-American life from before the camps.
Right. Things like a 1941 Sears Roebuck order form, probably for some routine household item, an old issue of Physical Culture magazine, an American publication showing they were fully participating in American life.
Just normal, everyday things.
Completely normal. Bronzed baby shoes engraved with the name Yuki, a silver tea set. These items are so specific, they show a family that was actively engaged in daily life right up until the moment they were forced out.
But the most devastating find is the photo album. Henry notices immediately that more than half the photos have been meticulously removed. Not torn out, but cut out, leaving these perfect, preserved white squares where the pages had been shielded from the yellowing.
Which raises the question, why would a family preserve an album but destroy the memories inside?
Exactly. It's a mystery.
And when Henry presses his nose to those empty pages, he inhales something startling, something that just shouldn't be there after 4 decades.
What was it?
The pages smelled distinctly of smoke.
Smoke, after 40 years.
That odor is the olfactory bridge back to 1942. It's the physical evidence that this wasn't just storage. This was self-destruction born of fear. That scent of smoke is our clue.
So what was burning? What desperate act are we smelling here? We have to jump back 44 years to understand why those photos were removed and why the Okabe family album, stashed so carefully in a basement, carries the ghost of a fire.
Okay, so shifting sharply back to 1942, we are plunged into Henry's really fraught identity conflict. Henry is Chinese-American, but the war complicates that identity beyond measure.
His father was a staunch Chinese nationalist, a firebrand who'd hosted figures like Dr. Sun Yat-sen, raised a lot of money for the Kuomintang army fighting the Japanese occupation in China.
And this nationalistic fervor meant Henry was caught in this specific and very dangerous political vice. His father insisted he attend the white school, Rainier Elementary.
But not for integration.
No, not at all. It was because he wanted Henry to get a Western education university. And as this bizarre, desperate shield against the rising anti-Japanese sentiment in Seattle, Henry was forced to wear a button.
The button.
The button, it declared unequivocally, "I am Chinese."
Which is such a key symbol of the time. It highlights the bizarre dynamics of wartime racial categorization. China was an ally, Japan was the enemy.
Right, so Henry's proximity to one identity was meant to shield him from the other. But his father's instructions were so rigid, Henry was forbidden from speaking Cantonese at home. Only speak you American.
So he had to be a perfect American son, but also an unwavering Chinese patriot. What a contradiction.
An impossible one. And that button, it was no magic shield. Henry faced immediate, constant, violent racial bullying. Kids like Chaz would shout, "Hey, Tojo, you forgot to salute the flag."
So he was targeted either for being Chinese, an outsider, or more often for being mistaken for Japanese, the enemy?
The irony is just crushing. Henry himself wasn't even sure which was worse. The racism directed at his actual ethnicity, or the racism for the ethnicity he was constantly trying to prove he wasn't?
And the institutions that should have provided some kind of structure, like his school.
Offered no refuge at all. His teacher, Mrs. Walker, she routinely ignored the inappropriate and off-color remarks. And she assumed Henry didn't understand English, despite his grades improving, which just compounded his isolation. He was in this state of constant surveillance and rejection.
So where does he find solace?
He finds it in the absolute antithesis of his father's traditional, rigid world, jazz music.
Of course.
This is where he finds his first true space of acceptance. Every day, he'd stop at the corner of South King Street in what was becoming known as Nihonmachi to give his lunch to Sheldon, a poor but polished black sax player.
And the music, it was a rebellion. He loved it because it was something his parents didn't listen to. It was a definitive break from the suffocating demands of his father's nationalism.
But the deep meaning was sociological. Jazz, in 1940 Seattle, offered a genuine melting pot.
Right, that's the core insight here. While the rest of society was furiously drawing these lines based on race and national origin.
The jazz scene was genuinely colorblind. As Henry observed, people everywhere still like the music, and they just accept musicians no matter what color they are.
For a boy who spent every single day trying to prove he wasn't a Jap and desperately trying to please his Chinese nationalist father, the jazz club represented this radical, temporary vision of an integrated American future.
A beautiful but very fleeting sanctuary of sound.
And it's in the school kitchen, where he works to earn his scholarship, that the political lines he's been forced to maintain, they finally start to blur.
He meets Keiko Okabe, and he's immediately struck by her poise, her slender cheekbones, her chestnut brown eyes, and the faint, distinctive smell of jasmine.
He registers all of this beauty and intrigue before the shock hits him.
Exactly, the shock that she is Japanese.
And this realization, it must have immediately activated that political barrier that defined his entire upbringing.
Oh, absolutely. Henry's father's intense nationalism, it wasn't abstract. It was fueled by immense tragedy, the bombings of Shanghai, the sickening brutality of the sacking of Nanjing.
And his father had actively organized boycotts of the entire Japanese community through the Chunghwa Benevolent Association, which was essentially the governing body for the Chinese community in Seattle.
The pressure on Henry was immense. For him to simply be seen speaking to Keiko was an act of profound betrayal against everything his father stood for.
And Keiko understands this tension.
Immediately. She doesn't apologize for her heritage. She defends her right to belong. She just says, "I'm American," which highlights the desperate but often ignored claim of the Nisei generation.
Despite the political minefield, their shared isolation at school and their after-school work duties, it draws them together.
And once again, the neutral ground they find is music. The jazz scene becomes more than just a refuge. It becomes the engine of their first shared rebellion.
They sneak out to the Black Elks Club.
To hear Sheldon and the legendary Oscar Holden play a late-night set, and this scene is so critical because it draws together the three marginalized communities of Seattle, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Black community in a single hidden space.
But getting in involves risk. To gain entrance, they aren't just sneaking in to listen, they're running an errand for the club's proprietor.
Right. They're given doctor's prescription slips and sent to the pharmacy to pick up something called Jamaican ginger.
And this detail demands a deep dive on its own. Jamaican ginger, often just called Jake.
It was an 80% alcohol fluid. It was legally sold as a medicinal tonic, but in reality, it was a necessary substitution because of systemic racism. During wartime rationing, and just due to pervasive prejudices, Black business owners were consistently denied liquor licenses for their colored clubs.
So the only way for the club to serve alcohol and survive economically was to resort to this legalized form of bootlegging, using this ginger tonic.
And Henry and Keiko, two kids navigating this dangerous landscape, suddenly find themselves as small victors in a grown-up scavenger hunt. Henry thinks, a little terrified, does this make us bootleggers?
It makes them co-conspirators in a small act of economic defiance against a racist system.
But the excitement is very short-lived. That same evening as they're leaving the club, the FBI raids the building.
Oh, no.
Agents shouting, demanding IDs. Henry witnesses the stark reality of wartime paranoia. A Japanese man, Mr. Toyama, who happens to be their school teacher, is brutally seized, sprawled on the floor, and arrested as a suspected spy.
And the agents grab Henry and Keiko.
They do, but they're released almost immediately when Henry points to his button. "I am Chinese."
Of course, the button.
One agent just looks at them, shakes his head, and says dismissively, Jesus, Ray, you collared a couple of chinks by mistake.
That one phrase, it just encapsulates the entire tragedy of Henry's identity conflict.
Completely. The button, meant to protect him, accidentally protected him from being treated as the Japanese enemy, even though they were just kids. The whole raid wasn't really about bootlegging. It was about rounding up potential spies.
Or, more accurately, just simple unchecked bigotry that couldn't tell the difference between one Asian face and another.
And that bigotry very quickly transitions from paranoia to cold, bureaucratic reality. Within a week of that raid, the massive impact of Executive Order 9066 slams into Nihonmachi.
And Henry's actually with the Okabe family when the army trucks and military police arrive.
They're posting Public Proclamation 1, ordering the evacuation of all persons of Japanese ancestry, not just recent immigrants, but citizens and non-citizens alike.
Which includes Keiko, an American-born citizen, a Nisei who has never known any other country.
And the reaction in the family really highlights the cultural divide. Keiko's mother immediately breaks down, crying, probably understanding the depth of the loss.
But her father.
Mr. Okabe remains outwardly calm, clinging desperately to this idea that they are Americans, that this injustice has to be temporary.
Meanwhile, Henry rushes home to tell his own father, hoping for some shred of empathy.
And his father, the staunch nationalist, he just hands the proclamation back to Henry with this almost unbelievable, chilling response. Better them than us.
Better them than us.
A lifetime of anti-Japanese propaganda and genuine wartime tragedy just culminates in that single, cruel act of self-preservation.
Henry's mother tries to console him, saying this is just the way things have to be, but Henry storms out, heartbroken. He recognizes the massive injustice being perpetrated, regardless of his father's politics.
And this heartbreak leads him back to Japantown, where he witnesses the critical prelude to the time capsule we talked about, the fires of fear.
This is where we definitively link 1942 to that 1986 basement discovery.
Yes. Driven by this primal fear of being labeled a spy or a collaborator or a traitor, Japanese Americans were frantically burning anything that could connect them to Japan. They were engaged in a kind of forced cultural self-erasure.
It's horrific. He sees women throwing heirloom kimonos, silk scrolls, and traditional artwork into these roaring fires.
The delicate fabrics, the sources note, settle like falling snow on the dirty pavement. Men are burning old letters, calligraphy, books. They are deliberately destroying proof of their heritage to try and prove their loyalty to a state that is actively betraying them.
The anecdote about the local photographer is the most poignant one, from Ochi Photography Studio.
Yeah, he tells Henry his face just etched with pain, that he burned his own wedding photos. Traditional Shinto dressing that had been in his family for 3 generations, a cherished memory, sacrificed for the slight chance of safety.
And this act of deliberate erasure, it explains everything about that photo album Henry found in 1986.
Everything. Why were so many pages removed? Because the memories, the images of family tradition, were deemed too dangerous to keep. The album itself, stashed in the basement, survived, but the proof of their Japanese identity did not.
And the scent of smoke Henry smelled in the basement.
That was the ghost of those desperate burning memories.
The mass removal scene quickly follows, unfolding at Union Station. Japanese Americans, men, women, children, are forced to gather. They're wearing these plain white identification tags.
They're allowed only 2 suitcases and 1 sea bag, the absolute minimum for survival. And their destination is the temporary relocation center, Camp Harmony, at the Puyallup Fairgrounds.
And as Henry is searching frantically for Keiko in the crowds, he sees mobs of angry white people behind barricades shouting insults at the departing families.
And in this raw, symbolic act of rage and self-definition, Henry spots Chaz, the school bully, who is wearing Henry's stolen "I am Chinese" button like some kind of grotesque trophy.
So Henry just loses control.
Completely. He fights Chaz, gets a black eye, but he gets the button back. And this is more than just a schoolyard fight. It's Henry claiming ownership over his own identity. He's deciding that he will not allow his symbol of protection to be a symbol of hatred.
It's a moment of profound personal decision in the face of all of this widespread hatred.
And he finds Keiko just moments before she boards the train. Mr. Okabe, seeing Henry's raw loyalty, tells him, "You just gave me hope."
Keiko's final act is taking Henry's reclaimed "I am Chinese" button and pinning it carefully to the inside cover of her diary. A physical promise that she won't forget him, even while she's being deported by the only country she's ever known.
And Henry is now driven by that promise. He immediately acts on his intention to see Keiko again, no matter the risk. And this brings us to a surprisingly complex character. Mrs. Beatty, the school lunch lady.
Right. Mrs. Beatty, who seemed kind of rough around the edges, maybe a little racist earlier, she reveals herself to be this unexpected moral compass.
She really does. Henry uses his connection to her to get a job as a civilian contractor to work at Camp Harmony at the Puyallup Fairgrounds for just 10 cents an hour.
This is Henry's sacrifice, risking his standing with his father, using every penny he earns just to try and breach the wall between them.
And he describes Camp Harmony, which used to be this bustling fairground, as a nightmare of barbed wire and guard towers. And here is the essential, chilling detail the sources provide.
What's that?
Henry immediately notices that the armed guards in the watchtowers have their guns pointed inward.
Wait, so the guns were pointing in?
Yeah. And that just destroys the official narrative.
The narrative that these camps were for their protection.
Exactly. The inward-pointing guns meant one thing. The purpose wasn't to protect the internees from the outside world. It was to make sure the internees could not escape. This was imprisonment, plain and simple, not protection.
And he manages to find Keiko at the visitor's fence line.
He does.
Yeah.
And their conversation reveals the harsh conditions. Keiko asks him for some specific supplies: stationery for letters, fabric for curtains.
To block the searchlights that swept the camp all night.
Right. And most importantly, the Oscar Holden record, the Alley Cat Strut, which she believes is stored in the boarded-up Panama Hotel basement.
The request for the record is so symbolic. The other items are for survival and privacy. The record is for spiritual endurance.
It's the music that bonded them, the sound of a world where race didn't matter, and she needs that sound to survive the reality of the camp.
So Henry gets the items and the record.
He does. Sheldon gives him a replacement copy, confirming his ongoing support, and Mrs. Beatty, defying her own societal expectations, proves her complexity by helping him smuggle the goods into the camp. Hidden inside a large bag of Calrose rice, a white woman helping the Chinese-American boy smuggle supplies to the Japanese-American girl. It's this small, beautiful act of resistance.
The emotional payoff happens on Keiko's birthday. The planned outdoor record concert for the internees gets canceled because of rain, which is just another symbol of the pervasive sadness.
But then the music plays anyway. Henry has arranged for the loudspeakers to blare Oscar Holden's Alley Cat Strut, a private message from Henry to Keiko, broadcasting louder than the storm.
Defying the barbed wire and the military guards.
But the stay at Camp Harmony is temporary. The Okabe family, along with thousands of others, are soon moved to the permanent, harsher camp, Minidoka in Idaho.
And this is the moment Henry knows he has to act drastically before that distance becomes insurmountable.
Right. So Henry and Sheldon, the two outsiders bound by music and loyalty, they take an overnight Greyhound bus across the state to see her one last time.
Henry's intention is desperate.
Yeah.
He plans to sneak Keiko out, bringing his I am Chinese button as a disguise for her, though in his haste he forgets to take his own off.
They arrive at Minidoka, and it is just a parched, dusty, desolate landscape. They see sewer lines being dug in the arid earth and barracks with these flimsy tar paper roofs. It looks and feels like a temporary prison built to last.
And Henry manages to sneak into the Okabe's barracks by blending in with a group of visiting Quaker school teachers who are there for humanitarian reasons.
Which is a massive risk. If he'd been caught, he would have been arrested, maybe even interned himself.
But Mr. Okabe, recognizing the sheer determination and honor Henry has shown,
Traveling hundreds of miles, risking his freedom.
he grants Henry permission to see Keiko, calling Henry's actions incredibly honorable.
And in that moment, the father's blessing just overrides the nationalistic hatred of Henry's own father.
Keiko and Henry share their first kiss in the dust and the rain, a sweet, imperfect moment of connection against impossible odds.
The immense distance of Minidoka makes the relationship difficult, but the long silence that follows. It's not due to geography, it's due to betrayal.
Henry keeps writing letter after letter, detailing his job, his life, his unending hope. But he gets no replies.
The letters just stop entirely, and Henry, heartbroken and self-blaming, assumes Keiko has moved on, found a new, safer community within those remote Idaho desert walls.
And then 3 years later, in 1945, the war finally ends. On VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, the final nail is hammered into Henry's past.
His father suffers a massive stroke, and the irony of the timing, the surrender of Japan on the very day his fervent nationalist father is struck down. It's profound.
While on his deathbed, Henry's father confesses the devastating truth. Henry discovers that his father had used his considerable political position within the Chinese benevolent associations.
The network Henry had always assumed was for good.
to systematically fix it so Henry's letters never made it to Keiko and hers never made it to him.
And this is the moment of ultimate trauma. Henry realizes that the silence he blamed on Keiko, the silence he accepted as her moving on, was actually a forced act of paternal cruelty.
His father's final words, spoken in Cantonese, "Wo wei ni zuo,"
I did it for you.
echo in the room. It's not an apology, it's a justification. The father truly believed he was protecting his son, severing a dangerous connection that would threaten Henry's future and contaminate his Chinese loyalty.
But for Henry, it was a life sentence of regret. He had assumed he let her go, but now he knew he had been violently separated.
And moments later, in the celebratory chaos outside, Seattle erupting in joy, he sees Ethel, who becomes his future wife, celebrating VJ Day.
But in the middle of the chaos, the fireworks, he sees a vision of Keiko. Just a pair of beautiful chestnut brown eyes across the street, lost in the crowds.
Was it a genuine sighting or a hallucination born of trauma? The sources suggest it really doesn't matter. It was the moment of profound regret, immediately followed by Ethel's comforting embrace.
And Henry chooses safety. He chooses the predictable future that Ethel represents, a future free from the volatile, painful politics of his past love. He marries Ethel and spends a lifetime avoiding the memories the Panama Hotel held.
Until 1986, when the basement forces the past right back into his life.
So we return to 1986. Henry continues his search in the Panama Hotel basement, and he finally finds it, the original Oscar Holden 78 record.
The record that should have been played louder than the storm.
And it is now confirmed to be broken in two perfect, irreparable pieces.
The physical state of the record is the ultimate metaphor for his life with Keiko. Shattered, imperfect, put away.
And around this time, Henry begins visiting Sheldon, his old friend and musical guide, who is now in a nursing home, the Hearthstone Inn, and nearing the end of his life.
And Sheldon, he's looking at the broken vinyl, and he understands the symbolism immediately.
He does. He gives Henry his final critical instruction. His voice is weak, but his meaning is crystal clear. I think it's time you fixed it, Henry. But I'm not talking about that old record. Fix it.
He means fixing the broken relationship, the long, forced silence. The life Henry allowed his father to shatter.
And this instruction, coming from the man who introduced him to the only colorblind space he ever knew, is the final moral push Henry needs. He resolves to act, ending 40 years of avoidance.
We see his quiet commitment reflected in his family. His son Marty and future daughter-in-law Samantha, they show their quiet support, not through words, but through action.
Right. They set out Henry's father's suit, the one Henry was always forced to wear, the symbol of his inherited duty, in Henry's suitcase. They recognize that for Henry to move forward, he has to first confront the past, wearing the skin of his former life.
So Henry travels to New York. The only carry-on he takes is the restored Oscar Holden record.
The vinyl was repaired imperfectly and had been played at Sheldon's funeral as a final tribute. The record itself is now a symbol of his restored intent, his commitment to healing that breach. It's a fragile, tangible piece of hope.
And he finds Keiko.
He does. She is now an artist, a widow herself, and her chestnut brown eyes, which had haunted his memory for 4 decades, shone as clear and fluid as ever.
The years just melt away, replaced by the crushing weight of all that unspoken history.
And Keiko's confession is simple but devastating. I'd almost given up on you.
So the silence wasn't her forgetting him. It was her emotional endurance, waiting for a letter that never came, waiting for a presence that was blocked by nationalism.
And Henry's response is to play the record. The restored, imperfect, scratchy record, the alley cat strut, plays on her old stereo. The music, though hollow-sounding after all these years, is enough.
It is the sound of their shared rebellion, their true history, resurrected.
And the entire journey, the discovery in the basement, the memory of the camp, the painful confrontation with his father's past, it all culminates in the final, perfect exchange of the Japanese phrase Sheldon had taught Henry all those years ago.
The compliment he'd never had the chance to use when they were young.
Keiko says, "Oi dekite," and Henry finishes, "Ureshi desu," a formal yet deeply emotional way of saying, "Nice to meet you, I was happy to meet you."
The circle is finally closed. Not with a burst of passion, but with the quiet, respectful acceptance of two people who finally recovered their shared past.
So what does this entire beautiful, tragic story mean for us?
I mean, the Panama Hotel basement was so much more than just a storage unit. It was a physical manifestation of forced erasure and lost time, holding artifacts that demanded Henry confront his past and, by extension, the history of his city.
Henry's narrative highlights the incredibly complex, often tragic, intersections of identity, nationalism, and love during wartime, especially for those in marginalized communities.
Right. The fundamental struggle for a place to call American was constant, even if it meant lying about your identity to get through the door, or burning your most cherished memories to prove your loyalty.
Henry's father tried to define him by his Chinese heritage and his hatred of Japan, but Henry found his own definition of American, one that included the integrated world of music, the loyalty of friendship, and the enduring love for Keiko.
He spent decades choosing safety, choosing Ethel and filial duty, allowing his father's final, cruel action to define his entire adult life.
It wasn't until he found the physical artifacts, the parasol, the sketchbooks, and that undeniable broken promise of the record, that he was forced to stop waiting and hiding.
His reconciliation happens not just by returning the objects, but by returning himself, his true self, to Keiko.
The sources include this fascinating meta detail. The Oster-Holden record Henry searched for and fixed is actually fictional. It was a shared memory they imprinted onto a piece of music that may not have even existed in that form.
So if a physical artifact does not exist, yet the memory of its music was strong enough to shape Henry's entire life and drive him across the country 40 years later, what power does this shared, entirely personal memory hold over documented history?
And we'll leave you with this provocative thought. When we consider the parts of our past that were damaged by forces outside our control, nationalism, betrayal, fear what pieces of your personal history that may only exist in memory are waiting for you to pick up and fix.